when it came to Windsor as a source, we saw that he didn't give his sources, and he literally inserted words into the text of an Ashkenazi Jew to make it say something it didn't say. Now,
how many roads? Too many signs, I can't read them. Wouldn't recognize the turn even if I seen it. Been driving all along, feel like I'm dreaming. Okay.
I have evidence of that to prove. That's why I'm asking. Because
what evidence? What's whenever I see evidence. As of now, I haven't seen a lot of valid evidence. What's the evidence that you think is valid evidence that I should look into?
Well, we have different video evidence showing the people tracing their DNA and them, giving us that information. You have multiple books that's proven.
What's a good one?
You have from Babylon to Timbuktu.
Okay, can I grab my copy of that real quick?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I have this book, right? There's some problems with it. I don't think it does show what you're saying at all. I mean, I imagine you've read this entire thing?
Yeah, I've read it.
All right. Absolutely. So, for example, page 84. In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there.
Mm-hmm.
A few things about this. One is he cites no source for this number. Just nothing. There's no source at all. It just says 1 million. Well, he wasn't alive back then. How does he know? Shouldn't he tell us how he knows that there was 1 million? He said it's been estimated. Well, who estimated that? This is not academic writing. You can't trust this because you don't know why that number is there. I see him writing it, but I want to know where he got that number from. Don't you? Do you know where he got that number from? 1 million Jews fled into Africa?
Well, I would take it that he got it from, resources dealing with the people, because in that same book, it talks about, how he interviewed certain African tribes and things like that. I would imagine that's where he got that from. And notice he said it was estimated. So it could have been less, it could have been more.
Right, but we need to know who did the estimating, right? We need to know, who estimated, because if it's you said he interviewed modern day Africans, well, how would they know? They're alive in the 1990s or whenever whenever he interviewed them, perhaps in the 60s or 70s. They're alive then. How would they know what happened back in 70 AD? How would they know that 1 million? And here's the other thing: this says fled into Africa. It doesn't even tell you where. Africa is a massive continent. Is he saying that they went all the way down to South Africa by and large? Or were they mainly in North Africa? Now, if he's saying North Africa, which actually has some merit to it, Rome controlled that area. But he says they fled Roman persecution. Well, if they're fleeing Rome, why are they going into North Africa, which is controlled by Rome? Look, in fact, I got a book about it. Let me show you this. This is called Christianity in Roman Africa.
Right.
And the reason it's called Roman Africa is because when Christianity was spreading at this time, this was still basically considered part of Rome. Well, Christianity is spreading after 70 AD, by and large, as far as when the book is concerned. Well, so how are they fleeing the Roman government if they're going into a Roman area? That does not make sense. How can they? And then he says the slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Slave markets where? What's the source? How does he know they're Jewish? How does he know? He doesn't give you any of that information. This book is a book where you just have to take his word for it. I was taught that that's not how you read academic. That's not the way that you read academically. You don't read where you just accept everything. unless the person is an established expert in the field or it's direct eyewitness testimony, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. It just means you can't get behind it. We got to say, okay, how do we know that that's accurate? Please give us your source. Why didn't he give us his sources? You can't check him on this because there's no source to check. So I don't hold that it's valid at all. Neither should you.
I would go along with it, because if you want to deal, and I don't have that book right in front of me, but when you deal with historical sources, when they say approximately, right? Approximately this amount of people, that amount of people, that happens in mostly all historical documents. Nobody who's writing it was there to actually know how many people. Like, for instance, we can deal with the Jewish Holocaust. Whenever we hear about the Holocaust, we hear that millions of Jews were killed in the Holocaust, right? And I don't have these sources in front of me right now, but I have a brother who brings out a source dealing with the Holocaust, and he shows how that number is not accurate. It wasn't millions of Jews. As a matter of fact, it was a mixture of not only some of the Jews in that Holocaust, but they tell you it was millions, approximately millions of Jews. So when you're dealing with certain sources like that, they're giving you the overall view of what's happening. Now, you mentioned them going into Africa, right? If you look at where Jerusalem is, because during the time of Mashiach, he told them, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, to flee, right? Now, they were fleeing Roman persecution in Jerusalem, because if you know about Jerusalem and them being under the Romans and the Greeks, there was a large diaspora from Jerusalem down into Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, and even into Rome. So you had Jews also in Rome during the time of this persecution. When the Romans invaded Jerusalem, it was because of a rebellion. It was a large rebellion of the Jews leading up to the Roman invasion of Jerusalem during that particular time. That was one of the main reasons Jerusalem was invaded by the Romans. It was due to rebellion. And so you had a large diaspora during that time, and even prior to that, going into different regions, going into Africa, going into Rome, going into other Greek areas. And so the Jews who were not killed during that time, they were all taken up to Rome and sold as slaves. The ones who weren't sold, they were put in the Colosseums and used as sport, because this was during a time when Christianity wasn't at its height. It was pretty much establishing during this particular time.
Well, if I could share something, this is from Tacitus. Tacitus is a well-known and trusted Roman historian. He wrote in Histories, I believe it's 513, that during the siege of Jerusalem, there were 600,000 inhabitants. 600,000 inhabitants in Jerusalem. And this is somebody who knew the aristocracy, and he knew he had access to Roman records and things like that because of his position. Well, if Tacitus is giving us a number that's anywhere close, 600,000 people in Jerusalem during the war under question, well, how is it that 1 million fled into Africa if Jerusalem itself only has 600,000? And because we have to also remember one other thing. Jews, when they scattered, didn't only go into Africa, they went into a lot of other places as well. So how do you get 1 million out of, I guess, all of Israel fleeing, perhaps? But see, this is centered on Jerusalem. So where's the number coming from? When Tacitus says there's only 600,000 Jews in Jerusalem at the time, how does Windsor tell us there's 1 million fleeing into Africa? And he doesn't tell us a time frame. He doesn't tell us a source. He doesn't tell us anything. But we have Tacitus, who is much closer to the events than Windsor, and he says 600,000. Do you see why there's some real problems. And this is what we get. This is one of the most trusted sources for Hebrew Israelites as far as their history. And you open it and you just find problem after problem.
Well, what does Tacitus say about the Israelites leaving Jerusalem? Because that number can vary. I'm aware of that source, by the way. That number can vary from source to source. 600,000. Some sources might say over 1 million. You understand? But what does he say concerning that time frame and what happened to those Jews during that time?
Well, he says that there was a siege of 143 days. So regardless of that exact number, Windsor would still need to tell us where he got the idea that 100 million Jews fled in Africa. My guess is most people would probably say, oh, Vocab doesn't know? That's somewhere in Josephus. That'd be my guess is what they would probably say. But let's just say that's correct. Windsor should say that in here. And when we have to, yeah, that's all I'm saying. And then we would want to find out, okay, do we have a reason to think that that's good? Because I don't just discount everything just because it, maybe there is something to it, but it needs to be way more careful. And the problem is with a book like this is it's not very careful. We're talking about the basis of the theory. And we got to remember, people also went into other places. They didn't only go into Africa. And he's not very specific about what he means by that. And then he says the slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Well, you gotta break that down a little bit. I'm not even saying that's impossible. That's not really what I'm saying. I'm not denying that there couldn't be elements of truth to all this, but I'm saying this is not any way for us to trust what he's writing because we don't have any way to source it or check it. And he's not an eyewitness. He's not quoting an eyewitness, and not even an eyewitness, but maybe a historian who lived later. Because Tacitus, like Josephus, they lived a little bit later. They were closer to the events, obviously, than we were, but just something there. And we just don't really get it with Windsor. And this is a key thing. And there's other parts with this. For example, he'll say on page 85, this is probably one of the, let me show you this. I'm trying to debate which part I want to get to. Okay, here you go. He quotes here another guy, Grazel, and he says this is from page 86, such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes. Okay, so he's talking about how there are Jewish tribes in northern Africa, or below even perhaps, toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, which it is said still make them approximately very closely the original Jewish population in Palestine. So there's the quote. But I want to show you something here from this Grazel quote, which he quotes Grazel, but he doesn't give us the source for Grazel that I can see. So it's like, okay, where's the source for Grazel, right? But watch what Windsor does. He literally, he inserts in brackets the phrase blacks in there. But let me show you what I mean. I'm going to try to get this close. Do you see the quote there on the screen?
Yeah.
He literally inserts that word in there.
Hold on, let me see. Hold up. Yeah, in the quotes, I see it. Yeah. It says Jewish tribes toughened by fighting tradition. And what's that word? I can't see it.
And hold on, sorry. And
possessed
of
physical characteristics.
And then he puts in brackets that.
Right, which it is said. What does the rest say? You can just read it off. You can read the rest of it off for me.
Which it is said will make them approximate very close to the original Jewish population of Palestine. So he's quoting somebody who's saying, hey, look, some of these folks that went into northern Africa are probably very close to the Jews who were in Palestine before they fled. Okay, that's fair enough. Don't necessarily deny that. But Windsor appears to be the one who inserts this phrase in brackets, not the author. So the author is saying they're probably close to the original population in Palestine. Windsor inserts the word blacks. You can't do that. You can't make the guy make your argument for you,
Well, usually when something is in quotes, it's to emphasize something that's already understood.
No, the brackets indicate an insertion. Brackets are.
Was that a bracket? Was that a bracket or quote?
Yeah. So it's quotes. And then it's a bracket inside the quote. You see, he put it in brackets, but it appears that's Windsor doing that. So let's see. Does he ever cite Grazel? Like what page or anything like that? Okay. Solomon Grazel, A History of the Jews, the Jewish Publication Society of America, 1956. And so he doesn't give a page number, but when you look at Grazel's, when you track down the original source, what you'll find is Grazel didn't put blacks in there. That's why it's in brackets. Windsor put blacks in there. That is not fair. That is not right, because that's not what Grazel is saying. Grazel is just saying they were similar to the population that left. But Windsor just inserts the word blacks in there to try to make his argument. Do you see? That's why it's in brackets. It's not in the original
point you're making. I get the point you're making. Another thing I noticed with modern day history, a lot of times that has to be done because whenever you're reading historical documents, let's say you're reading a document from the 1800s or the 1700s. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when they're describing certain things, they're describing it in an already understood manner. So it's already understood that the people who lived in ancient Palestine were indeed dark-skinned or black people. That was already established and understood. What Windsor is doing is he's putting emphasis on that point by putting that in there. I don't have the actual source from Grazel, right? But I know that that's how modern day history or historians oftentimes do things as opposed to ancient historians. You'll see that a lot. And it's like I said, it's already understood that the ancient people of Israel and Palestine were indeed black, dark-skinned people. They were compared to Egyptians.
Hey,
and Ethiopia.
The quote there from Windsor's book, right, where he quoted Solomon Grazel and then said their characteristics are the same, and then literally inserted into it the word blacks. That's a book called A History of the Jews. Solomon Grazel had a follow-up book to that called A History of the Contemporary Jews. And look who he put. Look at this is the cover of the book. So clearly the author doesn't think what Windsor had him saying. This is the cover of Solomon Grazel's other book on the history of the Jews.
The history of the contemporary Jews.
Yeah, this is his other work that goes into the modern era. This is the same
from
same
1900
author.
to present. So
yeah, same author, different book.
But these aren't those. That picture on the front of that wouldn't depict the ancient people. That's not a depiction of the ancient people.
I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying that this is. I'm not saying that this is a picture of an ancient Jew or anything. Right. All I'm saying is that the author is not saying what Windsor has him saying, and what Windsor has him saying is that the characteristics. Let me read it again. This is a quote from Grazel by Windsor, except Windsor literally inserts the word blacks into the quote. It's totally, you would not be allowed to do this in academic writing. Watch what he says here. Such is the explanation. This is Grazel being quoted by Windsor. Such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes, toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, which, it is said, still make them approximate very closely the original Jewish population of Palestine. End quote. That's the original quote. Windsor puts in brackets the word blacks to try to make his argument. But that's not what Grazel said. And my point by showing this other book by Grazel is not that say I agree with it or anything like that. That my point is to say that that's the picture of a Jew that Grazel had on his book. So he's clearly not saying that the population matched and it was a black population. He's not saying that. Solomon Grazel himself was an Ashkenazi Jew. Do you see what I'm saying?
I get what you said. Go ahead.
Okay. We talking about Grazel and Tacitus, but you know who I'm going to quote? I'm going to quote the Most High. You know what I'm saying? Amos 9:7. Are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel? Saith the Most High. Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Captor, and the Syrians from Ker?
Right.
That's the Most High.
We're talking about that, and that will refer more so to an ancient reference. If you're dealing with contemporary, you're dealing with more of a present day reference. And so my challenge would be the cover that you showed me. That's not the same information. The cover that you showed me and then the actual source that you read is two different sources.
Yeah, no, I noticed it was two different books, but I'm saying it's by the same author. He doesn't, if you look up his earlier book, History of the Jews, most editions don't have people on the cover. They just have words.
Right.
All the editions I can see. But my point is, by saying that, if he's going to have this, it's unfair for Windsor to quote him and then insert a word that Grazel did not include in his original text. But if you're reading Windsor's book and you didn't know that, you wouldn't know that he inserted the word blacks inside the text. You would think it was part of the original text of what Grazel was saying.
Right.
That is dishonest.
Well,
the book has a lot of stuff like that. And then the reason why I went after this is because you said, well, from Babylon to Timbuktu, it's not a reliable source. I really feel like we've seen that it's not a reliable source. And even that quote, I had to go to the back of the book because it didn't have a footnote or an endnote. I did just find in his bibliography, does he have Grazel mentioned as all anywhere, even though it didn't give a page number, he did have it. So I was able to find it that way, but that's not even the way you're supposed to do it. But Grazel doesn't think clearly, and remember, he himself is an Ashkenazi Jew, that what Windsor is trying to make him say, that's dishonest.
Let me say this to what you're saying. Once again, let me see that cover again that you put up.
Sure. Hold on, just let me grab it. That's great. One of Grazel's other books.
All right. So this is a different book, The History of Contemporary Jews.
Yes, I said it was a different book. I'm just saying it's the same author, so we know what he thinks, and he doesn't think. Either way, even if I didn't have this picture, Windsor is still inserting his own word into Grazel's quote, which is dishonest.
Let me say this. All right. Once again, we can have differences on that. My position on that is that he was inserting the obvious, but since you brought up that cover, that's dealing with the contemporary Jews from 1900 to present. And so I could easily take the position and say the source that Windsor quoted from was another source that has nothing to do with what you just showed, because that's contemporary from 1900 up moving forward. We're dealing with the history going back.
Yes, but you don't think that that it changed from 1900 forward. You would think that it's still, the people are the people, right?
Well, if you're dealing with 1900, then you're dealing with another group of people at that time identifying themselves as Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, during that particular time. From that point moving forward.
Okay. Well, I think either way, I hope that we're agreeing that you shouldn't be inserting your own words into other people's quotes.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. But what I do support is elaboration. And so you get what I'm saying? So say, for instance, if you're using a source to write a book or to make a point, and let's say that source is hitting on the point that you're making, but let's say that something you can add to it could elevate or bring more understanding from that quote, as long as you produce the source. But I agree with you. You shouldn't add to or take away from anybody's position. I agree with that 100%.